Hello and welcome to a tutorial about how to texture faces in Blender. Now, first, texturing faces isn't really that hard, but it is very time consuming. So if you have a lot of little faces or you have a lot of detailed things, it's not really going to be hard, it's just sort of busy work. It's going to take a lot of time. So for reference, here's something I've been working on for a while now, and it's pretty complicated, I'd say. There's a lot of little faces like here or something, but just to give you an estimate, this has probably taken me 15 hours of texturing so far in total, not including modeling it and everything. So here are all my materials, textures, and yeah, so going back to this new file, I'm going to use this for the tutorial. So let's just say I want to texture this, and I want to make, I don't know, a house. So I'll cut this. And there's my house. So we're going to texture this, and the first thing that you want to do, or I do this anyways, is press A to select everything and go to this tab right here. This is the materials tab, the little circle. So something that I like to do is I like to make a material that is red, and I'm going to apply that to all the faces. So if I'm texturing something that's complicated and I miss a little tiny face or something like that, it's a lot easier to notice because it's red and I can judge how far I have left in the project or, whatever. So I like to do this. You don't have to. This is just something that I find useful. So what we're going to do, I'm going to drag this out so I can fit more rows in here, but I'm going to create a new texture, and let's just say I want to make this wall textured, and this is going to be my house wall. So I'm going to create a new texture using that button, and I'm going to click Assign. Now, Assign, this button assigns any faces you have selected to whatever material you're on. I'll just name this house for clarity. So if I get all these faces and hit Assign, oh, wrong material, hit Assign, then they're all going to go to that material. So now that I've assigned this face to this material, I have to add a texture. So this is the texture panel, and I have a biggish screen, so if you're on a laptop or something, Blender might start up like this, and you'll have to drag this window out a bit in order to see this button, but this is the texture button, so I'm going to go over here, and this panel works on whatever material you have selected here. So if I click this and I go to materials panel, it's going to apply whatever I do here to this red material since it's selected. So I want to change the house material, so I'm going to click on it and go to the textures tab, and I'm going to hit new texture. So after you do that, you'll want to get a texture. So I already have some textures on my computer, and you can do whatever image you want, download off Google Images or whatever. But once you get an image that you want to texture, open up this image drop down menu and hit open. So this will go to whatever folder you have it set as. So I'm going to go to my desktop and open some textures, and these are all textures, PNG files. There are some files that are not supported. I don't know the list offhand, but PNGs are definitely good. So something that's kind of annoying is looking through this list. If I want to apply a texture to something, I can't see any of these, so these are all random names because I imported them, but in order to see a little thumbnail of what they are, you can press this button right here, and there you go. That gives you all the thumbnails. So I'm gonna get this texture, and you might want to hit both on this. It gives you an example of what your texture will look like rendered on a sphere or a cube or a plane or whatever. You can click one of these if you have a preference, and it's also going to show your texture just as a flat image. So I like to keep this on both, but you can really do whatever you want with that. And this is one type of texture that there's really repeating and non-repeating textures, and I'll show you what that means later, but there's not really any other things that you have to change down here. There's a lot of settings, I don't really use them that much. But let's go up here, and there's two panels that you want to memorize, and that's just default and UV editing. So for this purpose, we can just say UV editing is just texture editing, and that's what that means. So default and UV editing. Default is what I'm in right now. It's what Blender starts in, so let's go to UV editing. So on this right side, this is my sort of default window. I can see everything as I normally would. Notice this wireframe thing, you can kind of see the edges of everything through the object. I don't really like that, so you can turn it off if you want by using this button right here. And now we can move on to actually applying the image to the face. So this window right here is where you go to do that. In order to move this around, it's the same as moving this around. It's with the clicking down the middle mouse wheel. Or if you are emulating a mouse wheel, I think it's Alt that you have to hold down, and zooming in is the same. Zooming in, the mouse wheel zooms in. So to open the image that you applied to your material, you hit this button, and there you go, there's your image. So if you have a lot of images here that you're applying to materials, it can get somewhat confusing because you have to scroll down a big list. So I would recommend naming them something that you know what they are. I have that problem sometimes because all my textures are randomly named, but this is my texture. And two things that I would recommend turning on in this sort of sidebar here is repeat and stretch. Now repeat is, let me turn this off. Repeat is, it just repeats this image over and over again. So with repeating textures, you can really get a better image. Now this doesn't help too much because this texture is not repeating. I'll show you an example of a repeating texture a bit later, but I usually keep this on just because I don't like this blank space, and I can also go over on the sides here. But what stretch does is it shows you a heat map of your surface. So blue is completely unwarped. Picture this as a piece of paper, and if I put this piece of paper down over here on this quote-unquote table, it's going to be completely flat, and that's blue. So blue is good, and if I crinkle this up a bit, it's going to go green. Now green means that it's warped, and when you're working with complex shapes, this is going to be very useful because you want everything to be blue. And that's the reason I don't use it with stretch off, not only because it's kind of hard to see where my texture is since it's see-through, but you can also see when your texture is warped. So in order to see your texture on the shape, you have to go here and go to either texture or material. Now nothing is really showing up, and that's because we haven't lit the scene. So next I'm going to show you lighting the scene, and you have to add something like a light source. Blender starts with this lamp already here, but I'm going to delete that just so I can show you how to insert a light source. So I'm going to insert a hemi light, and a hemi light is pretty much what you'd imagine. It shines down on everything. So in the material window, we can now see this texture. So I'm going to go back to the UV window, go up to here and UV editing. So I'm going to, where's my stretch option? Oh yeah, I didn't click the face. So that's something to remember also. In order to actually see the texture on the image, you have to be in edit mode and have the face that you want to see selected. So now I'm going to go over to UV editing, and I should see, yeah, this blue square. So I have stretch turned on, and again that's the heat map function, and that's pretty useful. But now, as you can see, when I move this, this is why you don't want your texture to warp. So if I move it out like this and the heat map is getting brighter, this doesn't look very good. It's very stretchy, and I don't really like it. If you're going for some sort of aesthetic in any way, you'll probably want it where it's completely blue like this. So now my texture is not very stretched at all. Now it's a bit stretched over here. If I deselect it, you can kind of see this line bends a bit. So I want to fix that. And when you click on any one of these points, it's a lot like selecting a vertex over here. So if I want to select this point, I can move it around just like I would over there, except that this is a 2D space. The z-axis doesn't exist. So the coordinates are now right here. So I have this texture selected. This is the coordinates of that point. So if I go over here, I want to make this line flat. So y is the up and down, and x is the left and right. Z again does not exist because this is a 2D plane. So if I want to make this texture flat, I will copy the y value, Control C, and go over here and just apply that there, and there we go. Now this is also a bit bent, so I'm going to copy the left-right value x and paste that right there. So I now have a perfect square, and as you can see, I'm going to zoom in a bit. There's no really turns in this line. It's a pretty straight line. So something I don't like here is that it's sideways. So every control, every hotkey is the same. Rotate is R, scale is S, but I want to rotate it 90 degrees so it's right side up. Sometimes the image has something wrong with it, or well, it doesn't really matter, but sometimes when you go rotate 90, it does go the other way. So I'll just Control Z and rotate the other way -90, and there we go. My texture is right there. So the important thing to understand here is that this blue is that face. So if I move that around, the texture is going to move around on that face. If I scale this up, it's going to scale up. If I rotate it, etc. It's really just putting this face here and letting you move around with it. So, alright, I want this building to be this, say this yellow wall right here, and if I want to do that, I'll size down with S, and A is also select all. The vertexes here are kind of hard to see because it's black and orange, and sometimes it can blend in with your texture that you have, but there, and A is select all. So I'm just going to move it here, resize it, and there we go. Now this texture isn't designed for this model, but as you can see, that's my wall, and I can select these 2 points and go like this and stretch it out, de-stretch it. So one thing to note is that there is no face select or edge select in this UV editing window. So if I want to select this edge right here, I have to select both points, not just the edge itself. Or if I want to select the whole face, I have to select all the points on the face. Now I'm going to go back to default here, and I'm going to show you something that's pretty useful. So I'm going to select, I don't know, this face here, and I'm going to apply it to our house material, assign. I'm going to go back to the UV editing window, and once I unwrap it, you're going to see again the blank grid, and I just select the texture here. But something very useful is that this is both faces at the same time. So both faces are being moved around. It's a lot easier than doing this and then having to line that texture up with this. Instead, you can just select as many faces as you want and unwrap them. Now again, to unwrap, you hit U on this 3D window here. If you hit it over here, it won't do anything. So you go over here in this 3D window, hit U, and unwrap. So just U, click. And if you have a very complex shape, let's see if this face does it. I don't think it will. Yeah. So if you have a very complex shape, like a ton of sides, it's very curvy, something you'll want to do is triangulate it so it will go into here much better. And in order to triangulate something, it's Control T. So now it's all triangles, and sometimes if you have a complex face, it'll get imported into this window super messed up, so like, I don't know, something like this, and it's a really hard job to figure out where all these points go and like reassemble it somehow. And I mean, from this you would never guess it was this shape, so that's how triangulating works. I'm just going to revert these faces back to normal. And so back to these two now joined faces. They act as one face in this window, so I can scale it up, scale it down, rotate it, whatever I want, and it applies it to both faces. So that's very useful. You can do that with as many faces in a row as you want. There isn't really a limit. So now I'm going to show you what a repeating texture would look like. So I'm going to go back to default. And let's say I want to change this material to a different texture. So I click this again and go to the Materials tab, and I hit this. Once you give a file to this texture thing, it changes the button to this. So I just click this, and here's my textures again. I'll click this to get thumbnails, and an example of a repeating texture would be something like I don't know, this one. So I'm going to click on this one, and now it's this texture, and that's my house material. If you wanted to create a new material and assign a texture to that, you would hit this button. Oh, I'm sorry, that's wrong. You would hit this button, new, name it, I don't know, material 2. Go to texture, new, open, and just choose a texture. So I'm going to go back to this texture, and I'm going to go to the other side of the house. We've kind of messed with that side a bit. I'm going to go to my material 2, and oh, it's not there. So I must have not made sure that it was there, and as you can see, the open button is still here, so I didn't do something right. And you should check that once in a while. I occasionally mess up and get material without a texture, and in order to tell offhand if it's this gray ball, then you haven't applied a texture. As you can see, this one is red and this one is that other texture I applied, so automatically it's blue. You can tell if you haven't applied a texture by that gray ball there. So I'm just going to open up what I had before, this one, and I will apply that texture. So as you can see, it's no longer that gray ball, and I can apply that. So I'll select that face and hit assign. So this texture is not like the other textures. We're going to go to the UV editing up here, and as you can see, if I turn repeat off, this is the image we're working with. However, if I return repeat on, it really repeats itself to be one image. There's no cutoff in the image like there was in that other texture. It's repeatable. So I'm going to unwrap this face using U and unwrap. And I'm going to go here and select my texture. So this texture is again repeating. And something I don't think I mentioned earlier is that even though this area is black, it still repeats the texture without telling you. So if I move this over here, as you can see, this is still here. So this isn't black, it is actually repeating, it's just not showing you here. So I like to keep this repeat on just so I can visualize where this is without that black space. So repeating textures are much more easy to work with. You can scale them up and scale them down as far as you want to, and you won't really see any seams. So thank you everybody for watching. I hope that was informational. If you had some trouble with textures, I hope that solved your problems. If you have any questions, comment down below. I do check and read all my comments, so I'll try to reply to as many as I can. If you have any questions, or I might be able to direct you to another tutorial. But anyways, thanks for watching. Leave a like if this helped you out. It's my goal after all. So Yeah.